The sooner kids learn about financial literacy, the better. They have a greater chance of maintaining financial freedom and independence in their adult lives. But this goes beyond budgeting, spending, and knowing how credit works. It includes saving for short and long term goals. So, to find out more about what parents can do to educate their children on saving, I talked with personal finance expert and podcaster Timothy Smith, who hosts The Financial Dad with his two daughters. He has some great ideas on how to start your kids out right with money. Well, my guest today is Timothy Smith, the founder and CEO of Aurora Private Wealth, a financial services firm specializing in innovative and personalized wealth management strategies. With over 4 decades of experience, Tim has built a reputation as a leader in financial planning, offering tailored solutions for high net worth clients and empowering advisors to achieve independence and success in their practices. Beyond his professional achievements, Tim is a dedicated advocate for financial literacy. Together with his daughters, he co hosts The Financial Dad, a podcast designed to educate entrepreneurs, influencers, and creatives on essential financial topics like taxes, insurance, and investing, areas often overlooked in traditional education. Tim's engaging and reliable approach ensures listeners gain actionable insight to secure their financial futures. An outspoken voice on investment advisor fraud, Tim has firsthand experience in addressing this critical issue. Drawing from his personal and professional journey, he is finalizing a book offering practical advice on safeguarding investments against fraud. His goal is to raise awareness and equip individuals with the tools to protect their assets, highlighting his unwavering commitment to ethical financial practices. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So I mentioned before we hit record, I've talked in other episodes to folks about, how to talk to your kids about money, get them ready for the real world, and also financial literacy. These days, home economics isn't really taught in schools anymore. And when you and I were kids, it was, the boys were in shop and the girls were in home ec making dresses and learning how to cook pies and things like that.
To
So
prepare them for their lives as executives.
exactly. So the picture of financial literacy has really changed over the last few decades and is still really lacking in our schools. And I think a lot of parents find it difficult to talk to their children about financial literacy and getting ready for the real world. But of course, financial literacy goes beyond just budgeting and money management. It includes saving for short-term and long-term goals. So, getting beyond the basics a little bit, beyond those two topics, what advice do you have for parents and how to educate the kids on saving and investing, whether it's for a short or long-term goal?
Well, the first thing, is you got to have a conversation. You need to communicate, right? Just like in any relationship, you need to communicate. So, and there's the famous phrase, teachable moments, right? So, as you are going through your daily life, I think the simplest thing is just to explain to your children what you're doing. Dad, you're sitting there with a bunch of papers in front of you and receipts and everything else. What are you doing? Well, I'm doing my taxes. So taxes are something we all have to pay. And, every year we go through this process where we gather information that the government wants for us to provide in order to calculate what amount of tax we owe, et cetera. So finding that moment, I think, is a very good thing, or creating that moment. Some families literally have time that they set aside for just talking. Believe it or not, no cell phones, no TV, etc. It's a very hard thing to do in this day and age because everybody's on their phone, and Netflix is so ubiquitous and available to us. But you really just have to either make the time and have these conversations. And by the way, the breadth of the conversation to me should be what is the financial planning circle, so to speak, which is taxes and college funding and investing and insurance and estate planning and retirement planning. And, it's a very broad discipline. I'm a certified financial planner also. So this is what we do when we talk to people. So to get down to your question about short and long term goals and strategies, uh, first of all, goal setting itself is not taught. The schools do a lousy job on a lot of things, and I actually sit on the board of trustees of a college in New Jersey, and we're looking to differentiate ourselves by offering a life skills requirement as a graduation requirement, and it would be things like time management, financial literacy, goal setting, just various skills that people are going to use every day in their lives, for the rest of their lives, frankly. And so I think it's really important. So there have to be goals. And for most younger people, the goals fall into several categories. The first thing they typically are saving money for, and I mean beyond trinkets or gifts or little things they want. The first thing is typically a car. They need a down payment unless they're going to try to lease a car with no money down. But they need a down payment. So you sit your child down, you explain kind of how this works. Okay, you are making X amount of money where you're working, and you need to, if you're going to have a bank loan, maybe the parents are going to co-sign it. You'll need $1,000 to have a down payment. That's probably a low number, but and you're if you can save $100 a month in roughly a year, you would have about enough money for the down payment. So you sort of talk them through simple math, and time. I mean, basically, all of it is about time and amounts of saving adding up to the total. I when I do this with younger people, I leave out interest and compound returns and things like that. I leave that for another time. So that being the first thing, the longer term thing, of course, is financial independence. The next biggest thing is probably the house in between. They want to get a down payment for a house. Then they'll have things like college savings. If they have kids, they're gonna be putting away money for college, hopefully. But so each of these life stages has different needs and goals. And another thing about goal setting people should understand is that the achievement of one goal doesn't mean you sit on your hands and you're done for life. You move on to the next growth part of your life, right? So I think that you're just trying to set them up to say, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Let's talk about what it will take for that to happen, and explain a loan, explain a down payment, and then do the simple math to help them see roughly what it's going to take and how long for them to get where they want to go. And math being fairly simple to some people, if you can save twice as much, you can do it in half the time. Mm-hmm. So just that kind of a conversation would set up a child for everything from a car loan to a mortgage in terms of their understanding of how this kind of stuff works and preparing them better for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you talk about goals. I mean, it's I did one episode a while back on finding your why. I mean, it's a lot easier for people to discipline themselves to do what they have to do in their finances if they are clear on their goals, and a
Yes.
goal that not that just what they should achieve, but that they want to achieve.
Yes.
If you set a goal for yourself, I want a house, then you work harder towards that. And
yeah, there is science.
Helps you prioritize things as well in your life. That
there
you
is
want to
science
meet your financial
to
goals first.
Once you have a decision and a goal, the brain actually focuses better towards everything that you need to do to get there, and you ruminate on it more, and it's just more a part of your daily life, so it's much more likely to happen because you're taking all the steps every day necessary to make it happen. So goals, I personally think goal setting is like the number one thing you could probably teach a child.
Mhm.
because it sets them up for everything to have purpose, a why, for everything that they're going to do literally into their 80s or 90s. We always need a purpose.
Mhm.
It varies from person to person dramatically, obviously.
Mhm.
But when we feel like we have no purpose anymore, it's a very dark place to be.
Mhm.
And by always setting new goals and moving from this point to that point, always growing. This is something I talk to my children about all the time. You have to always be growing, always learning, always looking for what's next in your life. Otherwise, you are withering. There's no in between. You're moving forward, or you're moving backwards, basically. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Absolutely. So yeah, and it's important to have goals and focus, and it helps you to. There's sort of a hierarchy of goals too. I mean, you're going to have
Absolutely.
different goals, and having a clear idea of what has to happen first or what is more important than the others. I had a guest on the show once a while back, and I've told this story a couple times in subsequent episodes. She said she and her husband had bought this older house, and they wanted to replace all the windows. And because it was an older house, the windows were not standard window size, like for houses that are bought now. You go out and you get a
Yeah.
particular type of Anderson window, and it fits into the space you have for your window. They all had to be custom windows, and of course they were more expensive, and there were like at least a dozen different windows that they had to replace, and they had an idea of what the cost was and what they had to save. So every time something else came up, or, should we spend money on this, or what we should do money with that, they say, wait a minute, that's a window.
Yeah.
Well, that's a window and a half that we could spend that money on. And obviously, replacing the windows had a higher, a higher hierarchy, as it were,
Yeah.
uh, in their uh, map of their goals, so that everything was done in comparison with that, and it helped them stay on track.
Everything in life is priorities,
Hmm.
right? And a business plan has to have priorities. A life plan has to have priorities. And obviously, there are always conflicting
Hmm.
priorities. How much money do you put away towards kids for college versus retirement?
Hmm.
A dollar can only go so far. So one of the things that I think is great about financial planning is that it helps people make those decisions because they know what the numbers are. A lot of what we do is calculate this stuff for people, right? Listen, you need to save another 2% a year towards retirement if you want to be financially independent at 60, but that will interfere with fully funding college.
Hmm.
So, which you got to choose which way you want to go, but you can only choose smartly based upon having the right information at your fingertips. But yeah, everything's about priorities and setting priorities, and then the discipline to live it through.
Hmm. Now you talked about interest and things like compound interest and everything else, and whether it's buying a car or buying a home. And I would think that, although that's a little bit more of a complex uh, topic, and maybe for older children, but I would think, and would you agree that understanding how interest works and the cost of money, and saying, do you save up enough for a down payment? Well, how big a down payment versus how much you're going to have to borrow at what interest rate, and the cost of money, and also how credit cards work so they don't get into
Yep.
trouble with credit card debt, and saying,
Yep.
wait a minute, at these interest rates, you're paying a heck of a lot more for whatever you bought because you put it on the credit card and you carry the balance. And they need
Yep.
to understand that, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think in particular, when you talk about retirement planning or more long-term goals for people, the nature of compound interest becomes even more critical to understand because when someone starts when they're saving younger, that money has more time to compound. So you're earning return on the return on the return year after year after year on that money you put away very early. And that so Yes, explaining that to people, I think to kids, young people, is really important. We did an entire episode, literally, on this in our financial dad stuff, and so yeah, I mean that stuff is very very important for people to understand. There are just a lot of basic concepts, and interest and compound interest, credit cards are really critical stuff for young people to get a grasp of early.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion about teachable moments, and when you sit down about this time of year with all the documents on the dining room table and you're doing your taxes, preparing the tax return, and certainly explaining taxes to children. And there's a saying that goes, if you want to teach your children about taxes, eat a third of their ice cream. But,
It's a good saying. I like it.
but they'll get the idea real quick. But
Yeah.
but what approaches do you have as opposed? I mean, that makes a nice joke and everything, and an abject example. But what do you recommend as a way to explain taxes to children? I guess depending upon the age.
Yeah. Well, yes, age. They need to be a little older, but when our kids were probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something, I think we gave them an allowance.
Mhm.
And what we told them to do with it was to put a third of it towards something they'd like to give to charity, a third of it they could spend, and a third of it they should save.
Right.
So you're getting them the charitable part, besides being philanthropic, is really the tax piece to me. You're just giving this away. You're not getting it back, but you're getting accustomed to the notion that not every dollar you get can be spent. So, kids, I think, who have been through this or have done this exercise, when they get their first paycheck and they see FICA taxes and, maybe some federal and state taxes, they're not completely shocked that, they're $15 an hour for their 10 hours a week, that they didn't actually get a full $150. Where's the rest of my money? Would be their first thing to say. So, the second thing that it does, obviously, is it gets them accustomed to taking part of what they earn and saving it. So you're accomplishing kind of both things simultaneously with that. It's important for people, for everybody, to grasp that if you ever want to be financially independent, if you ever want to achieve home ownership and a lot of other kinds of goals, college funding for kids, you have to be a saver.
Mm-hmm.
You have to save money. And so getting them used to that notion early, I think, is really important. And that's the way we did it with our kids. And I've seen other people do it that way as well with theirs.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very important. And I've periodically you see on YouTube, there's a video of, or some TikTok or whatever video, a young woman was talking about how shocked she was that she had to pay taxes. She said, wait a minute, I have to pay money to work?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had no concept. It was amazing. I said, how did you grow up? Your parents never taught you this, never told you this. You go out into the real world, you get a paycheck, and all of a sudden you're not making nearly what you thought you were because money's being taken away and they don't understand it.
I think that also leads a little bit, and this will be the most political thing I say, but I think it leads some people to not grasp government and how it's funded.
Right.
That we give the money to the government and the government spends it. And so without having paid taxes or understanding that they are going to pay taxes, they also, never get quite the concept in their heads of how the government gets its money. So property taxes is a similar,
Yes.
bit of a shocker to some people. I was a councilman and mayor for a period of time, so had to deal a lot with property taxes as a result of that.
Well, I think understanding not only how the government gets money, but really even more so, understanding the value that you get in return. Now, I'm not not to get political, but necessarily in favor of a lot of taxes. But you do get things in return for that. You're going to work, you're driving down a road that somebody is maintaining. There
Yes.
are police patrolling your area and attempting to keep safe. There's a fire department that protects you. There are all sorts of you're being educated. That education you got growing up, that was paid for by something.
There's
And
an entire Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army out there to
right.
protect you. That's how they get, the money for it. Yes.
And that not only do you benefit, but there is as you expand out, there's a greater societal benefit rather than just the benefit to an individual. But
Yeah.
I think understanding, and maybe you eat third of their ice cream, but sort of garner some resentment. How it's like the kid saying, "I got to pay money to work," but if you understand what that money is for and what benefits they're getting from it in return, then whether it's health insurance or if money's coming out for a 401k or some other retirement that they understand those deductions on their paycheck and how they benefit from it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so.
So, all right. So we've talked about, we went beyond budgeting and cash flow and managing your money and goals and saving for short-term and long-term financial goals and taxes. How do and you mentioned that as we know, and I've done episodes on this, the earlier you start saving for retirement, the better, because your money has more time to grow.
Yes.
So you may not be able to, on the one hand, you're making less in your 20s than you will later in life. So you can contribute less to your retirement, but then again, that money has a much longer path to growth path over
Yes.
time than larger amounts of money invested later in life. So one of the things that we need to do in educating our children in the real world and in finances is how to save and invest.
Yeah.
So how do we teach children how to choose a good long-term investment? Mutual funds, individual stocks, bonds. As you know, as a certified financial planner, there are a bunch of options.
Yes.
How do you educate them and say, look, this is what you should be looking into, or at least get them started in creating a financial plan?
Well, you have to start by explaining to them the range of types of investment returns that you can typically expect from different kinds of instruments. So if you put your money in the bank, typically something like 2% per year is what you can earn in the bank long term.
Mm-hmm.
And we have CDs at 4% now, 4.5% if you go out 3 years, 5 years. But the long term trend is more like 2% per year.
Mm-hmm.
If you invest in bonds, and you kind of do have to explain a little bit what bonds are, maybe it's 4% per year, maybe 5%. Mm-hmm. If you invest in the stock market, it's typically something like 8 to 10, depending upon big company stocks, small company stocks, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, understand that range. Number two, understand that the stock market part, immediately people would say, well, why would I not invest in the stock market with everything? Well, maybe you should, but you have to understand that you'll also see some really big swings over time. Over your investment lifetime, you'll probably see 1 or 2 50% drops in the stock market. Mm-hmm. So you have to be ready and emotionally able to deal with that when the time comes. Mm-hmm. But if you show them the difference between 2% per year and 10% per year over long periods of time, it's an immense amount of money because of the compounding of those, not just the returns, but the compounding of the returns. So you're educating them that young people for retirement should be more aggressive, isn't the word I would use. I would just call it, reasonable, just long-term reasonable investing. Add to that the fact that it's a good discipline to save money when you're young. Add to that the fact that a lot of companies have a match, even on the small levels of savings, free money.
Mhm.
So, if you're only saving 3% per year and they match 3% for you, you've doubled your money. And you'll have twice as much money if you did nothing other than save that 3% as your salary goes up every year. You would have twice as much money at retirement as you were going to have. So that's powerful. They need to understand that piece of it. Finally, as to investing itself, I for young people, I typically just suggest that they buy like an S&P 500 index fund and keep it simple. Stock market, individual stocks are beyond the ability of most people to research and decide upon. Some people have a knack for it, but most people don't get any of this stuff. It's why we're talking about it, right? So to say to them, "Oh, I would buy you a mutual fund for technology or international or whatever," at first I just keep it simple, and this is what I've done with my own kids. S&P 500 index fund, Vanguard, iShares, whatever, and just keep it simple, and that should earn you roughly the market returns over the lifetime of the holding of the investment. So if the market does average 8%, you should get about 8% on your money without having to think about it, without having to do research or constantly. The one thing about buying a stock is you have to research it and make a decision to buy it. The harder part for most people is knowing when to sell it. Mm-hmm. So with an index fund, you kind of eliminate those decisions, and the market has kind of made the decision for you what the companies are to invest in. So that's what I do typically for young people.
Mm-hmm. So in choosing an investment, there are a lot of things out there. You hear periodically cryptocurrency being touted as a good investment and things like that. There are some good ideas and some bad ideas and some fraudulent ideas. And you talk about, protecting assets and protecting yourself from fraud. What advice you give to kids to, what to be wary of, what to look for, what to watch out for, to make sure that they don't fall for a scam? There are always risks with investments, but with some of these get-rich-quick schemes, the risk is rather high.
Yeah. So first thing to understand is on the amount of money that most of them can afford to invest when they're young, they're not going to get rich, even if they get meteoric returns. So for the sake of argument, if they have $5,000 to invest, even if it earns 10 times the money over 5 years, let's say, they only have $50,000. Now, that's a lot of money to them, but it's not necessarily, you're not rich at that point. You're not able to retire at that point. So I always tell people, getting rich quick, buy lottery tickets. That's about the only get rich quick scheme that could actually make you rich in all likelihood. Entrepreneurialism can make you rich, but for most people, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, time, money, etc. So, I don't recommend that for most people as a get-rich-quick scheme. Long-term investing just takes time and patience. As to the fraudulent stuff, one of the issues that we all face now all the time is that there are people out there trying to part us from our money all the time and steal it, outright steal it. And so, you could see a crypto site. Crypto, by the way, should be understood to be more speculative, and people should understand what speculation means versus investing, okay? Crypto is gaining acceptance as a currency in a lot of countries in Africa, for example. People deal in crypto because they don't want to put money in the banks. So crypto actually is now starting to have some economics behind it. And as that grows, crypto will, I think eventually it will be an investment rather than a speculative thing. But I still think it's pretty speculative now. I don't do much with it for clients. So things that look too good to be true typically are. You should never sign up for something online and give your banking information so that they can, you know, withdraw money for an investment in something like crypto or, you know, anything of Bitcoin, anything of that nature. What you want to do is, if you decide you're going to buy something like that, um, and honestly, I doubt I would ever recommend it to somebody young, but if they want to, you need to find a reputable dealer, someone you know has been working with, a referral of some kind, where you can have confidence that they're not a fly-by-night shop where the money is just going to be gone the next day, and you're not going to get your crypto or your Bitcoin or whatever. So, um, you know, anything that sounds too good to be true usually is too good to be true, and anything that sounds like you can get rich overnight usually is too good to be true. I'll give you an example. Back before 2008 and 9, before the housing crash, a friend of mine called me up and he said, "I have an offer from a developer. He's looking to borrow money at 16% interest. Mind you, interest rates were pretty much zero. And, he'll develop the land and we'll triple our money. Because we'll have participation, not just the interest on the money." My friend put $1 million into this, which I was surprised to even find out that he had, but that's a separate issue. And it turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. And what the advice I gave him at that time was, look, bank interest rates are 7 to 11%. If they have to borrow at 16%, that means not only will a bank not give them money, but even venture capitalists or private equity money, or somewhere an intermediary stage between banks and individuals like him, they won't even give them money. He's coming to you and offering something that is outsized to the market of interest rates, honestly. And it doesn't sound good to me. And, like I said, it turned out to be fraudulent. So, again, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. If you are feeling pressure to buy something, I would walk away. If there are these artificial deadlines being thrown out to try to motivate you to do something quickly, I wouldn't do it. A good investment, the market goes up, the market goes down. No one knows in 2 weeks whether crypto will be a better purchase at 80 rather than 93. We don't know. So to say you got to get in now because it's going to go to 150. Well, I don't know if I have to get in now. It could, waiting might work, might get a dip. Who knows? So, those are some red flags that people should be looking for when it comes to these kinds of investments, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And cryptocurrencies too. I mean, people need to realize that it isn't really money. It isn't really a coin.
Yeah, it's not backed by anything.
Right.
It's simply going up. It's like Dutch tulip bulbs. There's an entire book about manias. The tech bubble of the late 1990s, for example. Companies coming to the public markets being valued in the billions of dollars when they didn't even have revenue yet. Just ridiculous things. And what is it? The Extraordinary Delusions and the Madness of Crowds is the name of the book. And it goes through the history of manias in the investment world, where prices went up because they were going up, not because there was some relation to underlying value, which most stock investing has some kind of relationship to underlying value.
Right. And the buying power of that cryptocurrency can change dramatically, aside from just normal inflation with regular currency.
Yeah.
It can be much more dramatic with cryptocurrency. The buying power can go way down, way up. The actual money that you might have in your wallet can change. The balance can change dramatically over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just speculative. I mean, it dropped by 50% a year or so ago, right? Just because people stopped buying, just or whatever the news of the day was, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think my son bought some at one point and learned a hard lesson.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize you don't always make money, kind of thing. Well,
Oh yeah.
well, it's gonna go up 100% a year. Why wouldn't everybody buy it, Dad? Okay, all right. Take take. Good luck. Good luck with it.
Yeah. So I mentioned when I introduced you that you host a podcast with your daughters called The Financial Dad. And you've mentioned it in our
Yes.
discussions. What inspired you to create it, and what makes its approach to financial education unique?
Well, my son, the crypto buyer, was graduating from college, and he called me about a month or two before he graduated, and he said, "Hey, Dad, my friends and I are all about to graduate from college, but we know nothing about personal finance. Would you mind coming in and giving us like a seminar, just like prepare us a bit?" And I did. And, they were all so grateful, thankful. These were kids, very bright kids. They've all gone on to companies like Google and Amazon. And he was a computer science major in a kind of a unknown school, but it's a really great school. I was stunned at how good an education the kid got. So, but they were all very appreciative. And I think my younger daughter then said to me at some point, Dad, you should do this for people because nobody's teaching us this. She had had a course, the personal finance course in high school, which 20 states offer. And apparently she said, I didn't even realize what it was, and I don't remember any of it. So nothing stuck, very little anyway. And it may have been very basic, banking, savings accounts, checking accounts, some of that kind of thing. But that inspired me to look at, gee, what could I do? Because I've been a lifelong stage performer, believe it or not. And I'm a ham. You get me up in front of a crowd. I'm pretty good at just winging it for an hour or so. And so I decided, yeah, I think this would be a good idea. I have all this knowledge of, decades of experience of doing this. And you really don't realize how much you know until you talk to someone who knows nothing about what you know. And, all of the knowledge you've picked up over a lifetime, a career, it's very valuable to other people. And so it gives me a lot of fulfillment, to do this. So I do it with my two daughters, Bridget and Hallie. Mm-hmm. Luke is my son. He needs financial planning to stay away from crypto, but he's doing well on his own. So my two daughters and I started this, and initially it was just a series of videotapes. It was 22 videotapes on videos on everything that we've been talking about. Insurance, which we haven't spoken much about, car insurance, homeowners insurance, health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, the concept of insurance. Just like going into these topics so that people would understand them better. And it started there, and then the podcast came about because my older daughter, who is a PR person in her professional life, said, "You know what, Dad? I think a podcast it's a big thing these days, and it would be a great way to get this out to the public. People can listen, not listen, whatever." So we started the podcast. We are specializing parts of the podcast for entrepreneurs, as you mentioned earlier. There's a whole series of issues that come about when someone doesn't, withhold taxes for you, when you have to pay taxes either quarterly or, set up payroll for yourself and, things like that. Mm-hmm. So, or things like, if you're an entrepreneur, when do you know you are ready to start saving? When you start a business, cash is king. And so, you have to hold on to all the cash you can. And there are several ways to do that, leasing versus buying equipment, for example. But one of them is that most people don't save very much when they're early in their startup of a business. So we go into all those kinds of topics, and I'm just having a blast with it. Just really am enjoying, putting this out there for people, and it's just really a good feeling. I love doing it.
Good. Well, on top of all of that, the videotapes, the podcasts, and everything. I understand you're also working on a book. And tell us about that.
Yes.
Do you know when
Yeah.
it'll be out or what it's on?
Yeah. So the working title is 50 Ways to Avoid Investment Fraud. So unfortunately, I have had to clean up messes by financial advisors
Ooh.
who, literally about $20 million worth I've had to deal with over my career. Most of that was one guy who, was absolutely horrible. But there are certain, a financial advisor and the relationship with a client is a very intimate fiduciary relationship involving a lot of trust. It's very similar to you have a law degree. I know, lawyers are in a similar position. Accountants are in a similar position. People tell us stuff that they don't tell their spouses, So when a financial advisor persuades a client to take steps that allow the advisor to steal their money without them knowing about it, it's an enormous breach of that trust, obviously. And unfortunately, I've had to deal with it. So we talked about some red flags earlier. Those apply to investment fraud as well, by a financial advisor. And the book is about understanding, the main concept to understand is custody. Custody meaning who holds your money and has the ability to disperse it somewhere else. So think Merrill Lynch, or a bank. You open an account, the money sits there. And if you ask the bank to wire that money to some other location, some other person, they can do that. They can disperse those funds. You still are supposed to be able to control that disbursement. And in a financial advisor relationship, you might put money at Schwab or Fidelity. Your advisor should have discretion over those funds, meaning the ability to buy and sell financial instruments. They would have, in some instances, it's a very limited form of discretion that allows them to withdraw their money management fees from your account. Custody. That, not discretion, custody. That doesn't mean that they can wire money out of your account. If your advisor comes to you and says one of a couple of things, hey, I'd like you to sign these blank wire transfer forms so that in the future, I don't have to bother you when you want me to wire money somewhere. Okay? That's a bad thing. That's just a really bad idea. Most financial firms would fire a person just for suggesting that to clients because it opens the door to fraud so easily. That's number one. Number two would be, hey, I'm starting the Tim Smith Investment Fund. Steve's already signed up for it. And let's take $100,000 out of your Schwab account and we'll put it in my investment fund. And I'm going to buy small company stocks and micro caps and maybe some private equity investments as well. And I'll send you statements of what the value is in the account so that you always know where how much money you have. Sending statements to a client is that you develop on your own, create on your own. It's one thing if it comes out of a professional system of some kind, but something that the advisor obviously cooks up on their own. Huge red flag, because if you're not looking at your state.
At this point, Tim's device malfunctioned and we were cut off. I was later able to reestablish a connection, and we continued as follows.
But where I lost you, you were talking about uh, who is preparing the statement. I'll send you a statement.
Yeah.
If it's not being generated by a system, then that's a red flag. Sort of what Bernie Madoff was doing. So why don't you pick up with that?
Yeah. So if there is no real reason for a financial advisor to have to prepare statements for you, you want to be looking at the statements that come from the place that holds your money, the Schwab, and or compare the Schwab statement to the statement you're getting from an advisor periodically, just to make sure that they match up. Because an advisor creating statements is one of the easiest ways to cover up a fraud. Mm-hmm. And in the instances that I dealt with, most of it involved fake statements at some level. So, and getting back to the Tim Smith Investment Fund, there is really, really, really no good reason for the vast majority of investors to give custody over to their financial advisor to create their own fund and invest for them. Now, it's a little bit different if it's what's called a family office and you're doing private equity deals and some other things. But for for 95, 98% of investors, to hand over money to a private thing that your advisor says he's going to start or she's going to start, it is just too great a risk of fraud to do it. And I've counseled people in the past. The simple thing to say to whoever the person is just, sorry, I'm just not comfortable with that. That's all. And if the person keeps on pressing, yeah, listen, I said I'm not comfortable with that, and I meant it. I'm not comfortable with that. You just got to stick to the story. And by the way, any sort of pressure from the advisor is another red flag. Right?
Right.
That person not taking no for an answer in a situation like this is a really big red flag. That, I mean, what would be such a strong need for them to do this with you that would warrant them pressuring you into it? Mm-hmm. And again, artificial deadlines, it closes at the end of the month. We really need to move fast, things like that. All of those kinds of things can be, there's certainly high pressure sale tactics, if not fraudulent, if not a red flag of actual fraud. So I've been working on this book for a while, and I'm hoping to put it out later this year. If anybody is interested in getting a manuscript copy, I'm happy to send the version of it as it stands today. Steve, I'd be happy to send it to you. It's an easy read. It's not terribly long because some of this is very simple, and I'm actually looking for feedback. So I'd be happy to send it to anybody who sends me an email, and get it out to them.
All right. Well, I'll leave your email in the address in the show notes, along with a link to your podcast. I'm sure it has a website with all of the playing links.
Yes.
And have that ready for people to take a look at. But I appreciate having you on the show, Tim. A lot of new information on educating their children on financial literacy for the audience out there, the listeners. So I'm sure they appreciate that. And thanks for coming on the show.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.